Everybody, I'm going to drop off.
Take care, Roseanne. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like Nancy's having some trouble with her sound.
I'm so sorry.
There
I
he
was
is.
having
There
trouble
she
with
is.
my sound. Okay, I'll go back and say very, very quickly, the CPE credit, 3 of the 4 polling questions need to be answered, and you need to stay on the program for at least 50 minutes. Credit will be based on a 50-minute hour, and you will receive the credit will be available in 7 to 10 business days. If you do have issues with your polling, please answer the question in the Q&A box, and we'll be sure to issue you CPE credit. Thank you so much for letting me know that that was not coming through. And now, Brent Lawson, VP of Programs and Professional Development, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Nancy. Happy Friday, everybody. To our members, our strategic partners, and our guests, welcome to our second presentation in our Diversity and Inclusion series. We had our first session last week. There was some really good discussion and some good content, so I'm looking forward to today's event and hoping you'll get a lot out of it. Before we dive into the programming, I do want to plug some of our upcoming events. So the next one is on Wednesday, December 16th, where we're going to have Dan Riley, Senior Vice President of SMS Research, who's going to talk about supply chains in a post-COVID environment. Then immediately following that, we're going to have a happy hour trivia event and ugly sweater contest. I believe there's going to be prizes, and it's a great networking opportunity, so make sure you sign up. And then on Wednesday, January 13th, we are going to have our third program in our Diversity and Inclusion series. It's an event that's being co-promoted with the National Association of Corporate Directors, and it's going to feature Tawana Black, the CEO of the Center for Economic Inclusion. She's going to talk about moving diversity, equity, and inclusion forward. And always remember, you can find more information on these events at feitwincities.com. That being said, we have a great lineup of speakers today, and I'm pleased to introduce them both. First up, we're going to have Jonathan Weinhagen. He's the CEO of the Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce and co-chair of Minneapolis Forward. He's going to talk to us about some of the rebuilding efforts that are going on in Minneapolis since what's happened this summer. And then following him, we're going to have Dr. Bruce Corey. He's a Twin Cities-based economist, business expert, cultural entrepreneur, and member of the Concordia University faculty in St. Paul. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Jonathan. Take it away, Jonathan.
Before Jonathan begins, let's throw up our first poll for our audience. The first poll on your screen is, what is the estimated value of the economic potential of minorities in Minnesota? I'll give you just a few seconds. Don't forget to hit submit on your button. And I'll give you a few more. Oh, that's about it. Okay, I'm going to end that poll. Everyone's answered it. Thank you very much. I'm going to share those results. Okay.
Well, I think we agreed that this was a little bit of a trick question, so we were going to allow Dr. Corey to jump in and provide a little bit of context for what we're seeing here.
Hi, everybody. Yes, 60 billion, all those who answered that is correct. That's the value of the core economic assets like income and businesses and real estate. But when I factor in an estimate of the lifetime earnings for about 500,000 workers, that puts the combined economic potential to 1.4 trillion. So both answers are right.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Corey. And with that, I'll hand it off to Jonathan. Sorry, I missed you.
No worries. Thanks, Brent, and thanks to all of you for having me today. Grateful to be with you. Jonathan Weinhagen, President and CEO of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, serving over 2,000 members. We are the largest chamber in the state of Minnesota. I always like to start out with a question, which is hard in a virtual environment, but how is 2020 going for you? Certainly happy to share, on my front. I think I'm experiencing what a lot of folks are in a remote work environment. Newly minted distance learning teacher, and managing my organization, as so many of you are, through changing business models and trying to project and predict what the future will be as we head into an economic recovery. To tell you a little bit about Minneapolis and where we've been, we came into 2020 having just hosted the Super Bowl and the Final Four. We were, anticipating being in our 9th year of $1 billion of building permits, record employment in our downtown core, topping off at about 218,000 employees, and a residential population that had grown to 52,000, so all-time highs. And then on any number of top 10 lists across the world, we were in the top 10, oftentimes in the top 3. I always tell people, like, pre-pandemic, it was great, or was it? At the same time, while we're boasting all of these successes and all of this greatness, all of this sheen that our city had, we also had some real challenges. Boasting some of the worst academic achievement gaps in the country, the worst income disparities. Over the course of the last 10 years, we've only closed the income gap between our white population and population of color by about $600, $60 a year. And some of the worst health disparities and health gaps in the country. So all of this is happening, and then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. And we began to see how this pandemic was impacting people and businesses in our city, disproportionately impacting Black, Indigenous, people of color, and immigrants, and specifically our Black population. From both a public health standpoint, they were being infected at a higher rate and impacted at a higher rate, and from an economic standpoint. The chamber, out of the gate, after that initial stay-at-home order, pulled together a lot of partnerships and coalitions to begin to work to support businesses, primarily BIPOC businesses, into what we hoped would be positioning them for an economic recovery. Then 181 days ago, George Floyd was murdered at the hands of Minneapolis police on May 25th. And for 72 hours, we watched the city of Minneapolis literally burn. All corners of the city, from Broadway to Lake Street to Chicago to Lagoon. And we saw rioting and looting. I'll pause for a moment to remind folks that as difficult as it was to watch those hours and days after George Floyd's death, I remind folks that while it was his death that precipitated the events and the destruction, what it was really a response to was 400 to 500 years of structural, historical, and institutional racism and oppression. And that's the work that we are embarking on into the future. But what we know today, 6 months post George Floyd's death, 1,500 businesses were damaged. Damage is approaching $1 billion. Again, disproportionately impacted businesses owned by people of color. These are corridors that have historically been populated by business owners of color. We were really in a pressure cooker between the pandemic and the death of George Floyd that brought us to where we are today. Now, I've been asked to share a little bit of a recap about what rebuilding looks like, what are some of the strategies that we're deploying, and as importantly, how all of you as leaders in our community can help and be a part of our path forward. So as the smoke cleared and the dust settled, a group of leaders came together and recognized that we need to rebuild. And much credit to Mayor Jacob Fry, who stood up very quickly and said, I need a coalition to come together to think about what the future of this city is. But more importantly, what the future of these corridors that have historically been under underinvested, what that looks like. To my earlier point, at the end of the day, if we're honest with ourselves, take a hard look in the mirror, we left an economy that wasn't working for everyone. And I know that you've got Tawana Black on the docket to speak to you with the Center for Economic Inclusion, and she's going to do a great job of framing kind of all of the metrics and measures around that. We also know that we have an opportunity to rebuild into the future and to transform the city. But that takes some great intentionality. So when the mayor approached me to serve as one of the co-chairs of Minneapolis Forward, we had a really long conversation. We talked for about 45 minutes. And over the course of that discussion, no fewer than a dozen times, he said, we need to do this differently. We need to center BIPOC members of our community, particularly Black members in our community, at the center of this work. We need to empower the community to envision what they'd like the future to be. And I gotta be honest with you, I paused for a minute and I said, Mayor, it feels like the most sane thing that we could possibly do is have the CEO of the chamber lead an economic recovery effort, a transformation effort. That's when he got really clear about what this effort was going to be and what the role of leaders like me and what the role of leaders like you can be in this work. And it is not necessarily to lead in the traditional way, but it is to bring the access and the influence and the power to the work and hand it over to the community in a way we've never done before. So our coalition, Minneapolis Forward, is structured with a core strategy team, 12 members of our community that are working deeply in every corner of our city and have been to build out a strategy for what the future of Minneapolis looks like. We recognized that no individual or organization was positioned or built to do a rebuilding or transformation effort like we were going to embark on and that we're embarking on today. We also recognize that with the growing urgency around the pandemic and with the civil unrest and destruction and the significant gaps that exist, there needs to be an urgency and a near-term strategy as well as a longer 3 to 5 year horizon for physically building and re-energizing and re-envisioning the future of our city. So the core strategy team hit the ground running. Some of the near-term things that have been identified is significantly around gaps. One of the things we discovered along the corridors that were most impacted by the civil unrest is that many of the businesses were or underinsured. So that meant that we had business owners who saw the total destruction and devastation of their buildings, who had no insurance remedy, and others who had insurance remedy, but due to the nature of the destruction, found themselves with challenges. An example is a liquor store on Lake Street. Great insurance, they're going to be able to rebuild and be made whole with one exception. The demolition of their existing building was not covered, and the lowest cost estimates were $360,000 to demolish and get the site into a position where they could leverage the insurance dollars and rebuild. So the core strategy team initially identified 8 areas of action. So areas that this team wanted to build strategies and tactics around. They range from business retention. So the companies that were up and running on May 24th, how many of those are retained as we head into 2 and 3 and 4 year milestones, to reimagining public spaces and everything in between. The coalition is about 2/3 through its work. I'm working in small groups to develop very specific strategies and tactics to drive the work forward. So some examples, think about the retention of businesses. Building out a series of business advocates that in a very high touch concierge manner can work with small business owners to help them identify the needs that would best serve them in this moment. Having been a small business owner myself, a fourth generation family business owner, I understand the pressures that come with operating a business and working in the business every single day. And while we are a region that is rich with resources, it can be paralyzing. When you get sent to a portal and you see 180 different opportunities, that can prove to be as challenging as the actual support itself. So imagine a future where a business advocate can sit down with you, can translate and can understand the needs and where you are at in a life cycle and prescribe to you. Maybe you're a good fit for a forgivable loan through the SBA, or you're a good fit for traditional access to capital, or you need to work with a loan executive from an organization like SCORE because your business model wasn't designed to sustain itself at 50% capacity over the course of a sustained period of time. So this group has been meeting twice a week, bringing in other thought leaders and experts to bring forward a set of recommendations to the mayor and to the departments across the city of Minneapolis, which are now being built into implementation. So what are the budgetary components and what are the implementation components to drive this work forward? Concurrently working on fundraising. We know that there was $1 billion of damage into these corridors. We know that insurance is going to cover a portion of that. We know that there was a gap. We also know, as I said earlier, these are areas of our city that have historically been underinvested. And what if we imagine not rebuilding and investing $1 billion, but a multiple of that? What if Lake Street and Broadway and Chicago and Lagoon become these havens for capital investment? And havens for capital investment with community ownership at the center, and particularly BIPOC community ownership. So as we talk about those statistics that we pulled earlier, the $60 billion and the $1.4 trillion, what if we center this city and we center this region as the very best place for people of color and immigrants to succeed and to thrive and to create wealth and to create ownership? And we believe that we have the will to do that. So I will touch on a couple of additional things that have emerged from the Minneapolis Forward Community Now Coalition, as well as some other things we're thinking about as we head into what are dual economic recoveries. It would be remiss if I didn't briefly touch on the discussion around public safety and the topic of defunding the police department, which became a national narrative as part of the election, and even a global conversation as a veto-proof majority of the Minneapolis City Council positioned that earlier this year. We're having a lot of discussions around the future of police in the city of Minneapolis, and rightly so. After all, the civil unrest was precipitated by the death of a Black man at the hands of our police department. I happen to believe that we need a police department moving forward. We need law enforcement, but we need a more just department. What happened to George Floyd shouldn't have happened and should never happen again. I'd like to be able to sit in front of you and say that we couldn't anticipate this. Well, we could, because we've seen it before. We saw it with Jamal Clark. We've seen it with other people, both in our department and across the country. And we need to be working together to build out a continuum of public safety that meets the current needs of our community. And that's one of the only ways that we're going to continue to attract and retain the talent that we need, particularly talent of color, and create a space of belonging where everybody feels like they can participate in this economy. We are working 24 hours a day to support the new economy that we are heading into. Just last week, we launched a new platform called Elevate Business in partnership, a public-private partnership with Hennepin County to connect small businesses with an emphasis on BIPOC businesses to technical assistance resources, peer-to-peer networks, and topical webinars. One of the focuses of that is buying down BIPOC technical assistance. So the county, to their credit, is leveraging CARES dollars to help actually bring under contract technical assistance providers. This is to augment, and this will be one of my asks, the incredible pro bono technical assistance that has flooded us and that we are leveraging and deploying all across our city. So here's the first shameless ask. If you are an organization that provides some level of technical assistance and you have a capacity and an inventory of time to donate, I would encourage you to do so. Again, we've built a platform that we can connect you to, get you plugged in, and there is need, whether it's on the legal or the finance or marketing. We're going to need that. We're going to need that help. And then we're thinking about, again, raising that capital, raising that capacity to do the work that we need to do as we head into economic recovery. So to the extent that you have bandwidth and resources and you're thinking about supporting the work of rebuilding a more just, a more inclusive city, Minneapolis Forward is a landing place for that. Encourage folks to visit the city's website, minneapolismn.gov/Minneapolis Forward. You can learn really specifically about each of the 8 areas of action, where we're at in the process, how you can get plugged in to that work. I tell people every single day, I grew up in this city, I grew up in this region. I've always been proud to be from the Minneapolis-St. Paul marketplace, and I am exceedingly bullish on our future. I believe that we have all of the assets in place, not just to recover faster than any of our peer communities, and we know that we can because in the last economic crisis we did, but also to recover in a more just way. Not only do we have the capacity and the assets, but we have the responsibility. So again, I appreciate having the opportunity to spend time with you today. Look forward to an opportunity for some dialogue and questions and answers. And now I'm going to turn it over to my friend and much smarter academic, Dr. Bruce Corey, who I'm exceedingly grateful to not be going after. So welcome, Dr. Corey.
Oh, sorry about that. I just had to unmute myself. And now I will put my slide. Thank you very much, Jonathan. I have always appreciated and admired your work from afar, and I can see from your presentation the enthusiasm that you bring for Minneapolis. After hearing you, I want to move from St. Paul to Minneapolis. But thank you very much for that great summary of what's going on in Minneapolis. To the panelists, first, thank you, FEI, for inviting me to present here. And thank you to all the participants in this panel. Little background, I am Associate Vice President of Government and Community Relations at Concordia University in St. Paul. So Concordia University is the small university by the freeway, but we've come up in very significant ways in terms of the current crisis that has hit academia. We are a very solid institution because we diversified what we offered and made what we do more career-centric. And recently Forbes listed us as one of the top online universities in terms of return on investment. So when I talk about online universities, I teach currently a course in global economics. And the last time I taught it, I had students from based out in Indonesia and in Australia, and it was a fun class. But today, I want to pick up from where Jonathan left out and to talk a little bit about I call the ALANA, African, Latino, Asian, and Native American economy. And the way I use it because it focuses on who I'm talking about. And personally, I don't like the word or don't like to be referred to as a person of color. I think I'd like to be having my own identity. And so in response to the triple crisis that hit Minnesota and the nation, and that is COVID, the economic decline, and the civil unrest, a group of us formed this ALANA Community Brain Trust. And as Jonathan was talking about the initiatives, we have zeroed in on 2 big challenges that this community is facing, and that is access to capital and the need to build capacity. And around those 2, we've engaged with the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. We've asked them to change their framework from being the lender of the last resort to also be the land of the last community resort, and to introduce and leverage the tools that they have to build this Alana economy. Because as you can see, it's been terribly devastated from these crises. We've also engaged with Congress, with the SBA over the PPP and how it, the PPP loan program and how it was failing to reach our communities and what they need to be done. And so most recently, I was invited by the Minnesota House Select Committee on Racial Justice to offer some estimates on the economic costs of racism and what can we do about it. And so in reflecting on that, we offer the Minnesota solution. And so what we are talking about, as I mentioned earlier, is this 4.4 trillion economy. And this economy includes the talent of people and the talent of these economic assets they have. And if, as a point of comparison, the GDP of Mexico is 1.2 trillion, I believe. So just think about the magnitude of what we are talking about in terms of the assets that this community brings to Minnesota. This includes the investments in $25 billion in income, 45,000 businesses when last counted, over 500,000 workers, and about another 500,000 in school and university, which I haven't included. If I looked at that portfolio of the people, if all our youth in the schools and universities were to get a bachelor's degree, that would represent a portfolio of $1.5 trillion. Can you imagine that, what it could mean to Minnesota? And this community pays easily $3 billion annually in Minnesota taxes, and it brings a whole lot of global and cultural assets, from global networks to cultural assets, as you can see reflected in these cultural destination areas like Little Africa, Little Mekong. You've seen in my introduction, I call myself a cultural entrepreneur because I've been working for many years around these concepts of how could we make these diverse cultural assets and low-income communities be an engine of economic growth. And so when you talk about the Little Mekong Night Market and Little Africa and Little Africa Fest, this is how we leverage cultural assets to build economic development. So Dr. Myers from the Humphrey Institute and Jonathan referred to this, was this Minnesota paradox. How could you have the worst racial disparities in coexisting with a high quality of life, progressive politics, innovative programs, and so on? And so the answer rose in the fact that all these good programs did not take into consideration the fact that there is a racial context. And unless we address that racial context, we are not going to be successful. I was recently in a policy conversation and they were just talking about everything in race neutral terms. Okay, here are the 5 factors that determine success. And if we fix these 5 factors, we're going to close the gap. And I said, hey, but what about that racial context in which these 5 factors operate? So today, if anything that we have learned from the experiences of today, it is that we cannot be colorblind. We cannot have race neutral programs. We have to have race conscious programs if we want to be successful. And the impact of that is when I estimate what is the cost of the gaps in business development and income and workforce and education, if I quantify that gap, it is a huge amount of $287 billion loss for that these Alana communities have faced as a result of this. And the flip side of it is if you close the gap, Minnesota would be wealthier by $287 billion, and Minnesota would be getting at least $2 billion extra in taxes. In these days when we're talking about budget deficits, we are killing the goose that's laying the golden egg, so to speak. So we come up with the Minnesota solution of shared sustainable prosperity. How could we come up with a solution that works for all the Alana communities, but not forgetting the low-income communities who are also hurting because of the crisis that we are part of? And so there could be 5 elements of these of the solution. 1, stop looking at our communities as a problem. One of the most astonishing things I saw when the video was shown in the legislature about the civil unrest And if you were to come from a different country and you would look at the video that the legislators showed in the Senate, you would think that the minority communities, the Black community, was the cause of all those problems and destruction. And so that's a stereotype that's continually being played out in Minnesota. And that's terribly wrong because it doesn't do justice to the fact that we have a $1.4 trillion asset in Minnesota. And it's time that Minnesota policymakers and people in power and ordinary people start looking at the person that you see across the street, that you look at as a problem, to look at the asset that's going to bring Minnesota into prosperity. And we have to put people at the core of all that we are doing. We have to operate with cultural intelligence, and we've got to empower individuals to change their own destiny. And I like what Jonathan said about Minneapolis, about community ownership. That's the empowerment that we're talking about. And we've got to, as no excuses or no deviating from the path, we need sustained investment in this economic development infrastructure that is needed for the Alana communities. And what do I mean by the economic development infrastructure? That means every community should have a vehicle, a community development financial institution, a corporation that helps businesses and projects move forward. There should be business incubators, there should be job boards, there should be business to business, land trust, asset building tools, an equity fund, because people can't afford to take any more loans right now, co-ops, community health clinics, wellness centers. Plus, we're also realizing we need a capacity around emergency shelter, food, and energy as these communities start to recover. And so my recommendation to the state is, first, the state has a lot of things that can be done without new money. Why can't they leverage the financial deposits with banks? And I know a lot of you are in the financial world, and I can get into some of the financial issues we've just launched and talking to the banks about an Alana Banking Alliance to get banks on board to work with us on this. The state has billions of dollars in deposits in banks. Can't we work with them to increase lending in our communities? The state has billions of dollars in investments, and they do invest in various activities. Can't they invest in a community investment note that could cause this economic development to occur? Can the state use its money to provide guarantees? Like a banker told me how powerful was the state loan guarantee in making sure the PPP program reached small businesses. We also need to leverage public spending. From the time I counted and did a study in 2000 when Governor Ventura appointed me to the statewide task force on minority business development, I found out that only 2% or less than 2% of state spending came to minority contractors. And today, if you go on to look at the website of Minnesota, you'll find it's not very different. It's a shame that the state engine of economic growth, this spending, has not been effectively used to grow businesses. We have rules and regulations that serve as barriers of small businesses as they do business with the state. We need to develop mentoring partnership, but we need to set goals and of utilization and goals of how we can grow these businesses forward. We need to leverage our resources with Congress. For example, we've been talking to the Federal Reserve Bank. Why can't you be the lender of the last community resort? Why can't you back $1 billion in bonds that would go to this economic development infrastructure? Why can't you create a facility like you created for corporations where you are buying their debt? Why don't you buy a community investment note? So far, the response from the Federal Reserve Bank is that we need to change statutes. And that's what I think we are already working on that. There are some bills in Congress that if they passed will make this possible. We need to change the way the Small Business Administration operates, the way the Housing and Urban Development Department operates, the way the CDFI funds operate, how they can all be more effective in serving the Alana communities. And that's why we propose that the state puts in $1 billion development fund that could go into loan guarantees, into land trusts, into this equity fund, into home ownerships, into a workforce fund. One of the biggest challenges today is, as Jonathan also talked about, was pivoting our business in the crisis to be more effective post-crisis, and pivoting our workers to be more skilled, to have the skills that are needed for the future. And there are some great programs at work that could be funded to make that more effective. And my solution, and I know it's a tough sell, but you know that a lot of the wealth in Minnesota has been acquired because of the redlining that happened historically. And on the screen is a map of, and there are maps of Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, Rochester, of how these maps were drawn where people were denied the opportunity to grow their wealth. And as you know, in America, home ownership is a big source for wealth creation. So I propose that a 1% tax on every real estate transaction, and we could keep it over 400,000 to exclude the smaller homes. And this would yield, just that tax could yield easily, just in the metro area, over 100 million a year that could fund this $1 billion bond offering for Alana economic development. So those
Excellent.
are some thoughts.
Dr. Corey, can I interrupt for a poll?
Yeah, for sure.
Great. Thank you so much. A second poll is on your screen, audience. What is the estimated economic loss to the minority communities because of racial disparities? 10 billion, 287 billion, 200 million, or 1 billion? I'll give you just a few seconds to answer that poll. Okay, we're coming to the end of that poll, folks. If you don't have your answers in, please do that now. Okay, I'm going to end that poll and share those results. And there you go.
Yeah, as a good professor, you can see who is listening. So yeah, 287 billion is right. That's an estimate. And like everything, it's based on assumptions, but that's an estimate of the economic cost of racism. And if you look at the GDP ranking by country, you'll find that amount is bigger than the GDP of many countries in the world. So I've ended my side of the presentation. I look forward to hearing. I could get into financial issues, access to capital issues, but I'm really excited about the opportunity to work with banks to create and financial institutions, because when I analyzed the PPP program, I found a growing presence of fintech accessing the Alana communities and nonprofits. For the Black community, for example, they have less access to capital and relying more on nonprofits like CRF and MEDA and NDC and these to get capital. So we really need to address that issue. And I look forward to some of you have the expertise and the insights to talk about those kinds of issues. But I'm open for questions and be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Dr. Corey. Please, if you have questions for Dr. Corey, you can enter those in the Q&A section on your platform.
And Nancy, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I actually have received some from folks that were sending them directly to me. So I think the first one would go probably to Jonathan. It came in during his conversation. So Jonathan, you talked about making Minneapolis a haven for small local businesses. Do you feel there's a particular opportunity for small banks or small local financial institutions to grow and gain some market share by helping in the revitalization work? And if so, how would you suggest they go about doing that?
I think the short and quick answer is absolutely, yes. I've been telling people a lot that the currency of this economic recovery is going to be trust. So I would start by getting into the community, getting on the ground, getting to know people along the corridors that have been impacted. As Dr. Corey just framed, banking isn't equal. Our communities of color often don't have access to those types of relationships. And there are a lot of barriers in the traditional banking space. So I would encourage financial executives to begin to build relationship in community, begin to build trust in community. That's going to have a direct correlation to your ability to gain market share as we grow these corridors, as we grow the city of Minneapolis and this region. I think the other thing to think about is, how do you think differently? To my earlier point about the mayor really challenging all of us to think differently about how we engage in an economic recovery effort, within the boundaries of the regulatory environment. And I appreciate and probably just get as frustrated as all of you do by some of the challenges that those pose. How can you get flexible and creative to think differently about how you, whether it's provide access to capital or participate and partner with small business as we move into the economic recovery?
Great, thank you. Dr. Corey, did you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
If people are interested in knowing, I can put up on the screen the framework of the Alana Banking Alliance, or what we are asking people to, because I, as Jonathan says, I would appreciate some of the participants to join us in as we help to build connections and relationships between people and businesses and financial institutions, because that was the single most reason why they didn't get PPP loans. They didn't have that relationship with the banker. And the second is, how do we start building risk-sharing pools so that we can get these loans, sharing of the risk of the financial institution with community development corporations, and get that, and in return, how could the Alana communities offer cultural intelligence and support to the financial institutions? Because it's not, lending is not a science as such, it's an art. You've got to understand communities to understand what product will work and how it will work most effectively.
Okay, thank you. So I have a couple others here. The first one, and I apologize to the individual that sent it if I don't capture this appropriately, but both of you have mentioned trying to create a vibrant local community, particularly in the Minneapolis area. Dr. Corey, you mentioned Little Africa, Little Mekong. Jonathan, you talked about some of the efforts and how you think that's going to help. To help people envision it, are you thinking of something, and these are probably not the greatest references, this is where I'm struggling a little bit with how I paraphrase, but like if you look at New York City or San Francisco and you've got Little China and some of those kind of places, are you thinking of doing things like that, only promoting them as more like it would be local marketplaces? It would be, almost like a Disney World Epcot type thing inside the city, or is the thought something different? And why don't we start with Jonathan first? If that question didn't make any sense to you, please let me know and I'll try and see if I can get clarification.
Well, I think I get the spirit of the question. I'll use an example to provide some context. There is a small business owner in North Minneapolis. His name is Houston White. He owns a barber shop and he has a vision for creating Camden Town, a corridor that is really focused on Black ownership and building out what he would tell you is kind of the Grand Avenue of North Minneapolis. So I think those are the types of things that you start thinking about. I really would caution folks against just a marketing campaign or a top-down approach. And we talk about community leadership, community ownership. There's a lot of vision out there. There's a lot of vision in North Minneapolis. There's a lot of vision on Lake Street. They don't need a new vision. They need access to the resources to build out the vision that they have for their community and for their future. And I think that's the difference that we need right now in this moment, is to really take the lead from community and to think about how do we, whether we're corporate executives and we have access to resources to deploy, how do we do that in a more agile and flexible and community-led, community-focused way? I mean, that's going to get to a lot of the outcomes that you framed in your question, Brent.
Okay. Dr. Corey, did you have anything to add to that one? You're on mute, I think.
There you go. I'm okay, yeah.
Okay. So we had a question come in, and actually I want to expand on, I'm going to ask the question, and then when you're done answering, I'm probably going to expand on it because it's similar to another one we have. But how can the Chinese community within the Twin Cities in particular reach out to you so that they can participate in these initiatives and some of these things that you're working on? And once you respond to that, I would ask, how does anybody get started? And Jonathan, I know you talked about where you're, the stuff with Minneapolis Forward, and you gave us the link, and that's great. And Dr. Corey, you've talked about some things, but I think a lot of the folks I talk to with the whole diversity and inclusion, especially the small and mid-sized companies, like in the northern Minnesota, just north of Minneapolis area, where you've got a lot of small manufacturers, they're really struggling with, well, what do I do and how do I even get started? Dr. Corey, we'll let you start this time. How's that?
Yeah. I also want to respond to some of the questions I saw in the chat, and that's why I was thinking about it as you were talking about that. Someone asked, what is Alana, African, Latino, Asian, and Native American? And they also asked about why do people not have a relationship with a banker? And it's a multiple reasons. One is, first, they have not been able to get into the door. Second is, when they do get in the door, people don't understand their needs, or because of predisposition of looking at stereotypes about communities, they don't get the loan, or they don't get the loan at the right rate. They charge a high interest, and all of these are shown out in statistical studies that have happened. So as a result, people have relied more to personal saving mechanisms to keep their assets. And when a emergency strikes, like in the PPP program, and you had to get through a bank or somewhere to do it, you didn't have your paperwork in hand. The banker didn't know anything about you to be able to, because bankers were actually calling their clients, hey, there's a program, get into it. But if they didn't know them, they wouldn't get it. So coming back to your question, Brent, could you just summarize again what was the question you asked? Oh, the Chinese community. Okay, yeah.
Yes, right.
Okay. Process for the Alana Community Brain Trust. Send me a note, and I will connect you to the. We are developing a talent roster of who has skills for what kind of things. For example, the Department of Public Safety reached out to us and said, we have $8 million of CARES Act funding for youth in COVID. Can you help us get the word out? Well, we did help get the word out statewide, and about organizations that applied that we knew of got about $600,000 in income. And one of the groups that applied, we also offered a program for youth. And to show the power of this network, we have over 100 youth signed up for this 5-week financial literacy and leadership development, community development building effort from about 40 schools and about 20 cities. That's the kind of leverage that we can offer people. So we welcome you to come in and connect with us, because we need to develop that talent base and the resources to get things done.
Brett, I would quickly offer a similar answer. Reach out to us. I sent the information to Minneapolis Forward. There's contact information there. I am hopeful that the FBI team will be sharing my contact information. Shoot me an email. I would love to talk to members of the Chinese community and members of every community about how they can see themselves in the work of rebuilding and transforming our city as we head into the economic recovery.
Thank you guys for that. I'm going to push a poll because we have a few minutes. This is the third poll, and before we finish Q&A, I'll push the fourth. What are the major barriers to access minority borrowers faced in accessing capital? Personal relationship with a banker, don't think they will get the loan, over-reliance on credit scores, over-reliance on higher or riskier credit, all of the above. That was a long poll, I apologize, but it is also very in-depth. And I think I got all my answers in, and now I'll share the results and see how well you guys were paying attention. Thank you.
And that's true. All of those were from the Federal Reserve Bank study on minority business access to capital. And that's what they found out.
Okay. So I have a couple more questions here. We'll see if we can get to them. So one of them actually follows up to some extent on what you were just talking about. Where do you think, what's more important right now? Education and building for the future, or trying to address some of the immediate needs that we face right now? Dr. Corey, do you want to take that first?
I think they're short-term and long-term. Education, it's really sad. The achievement gap has become worse. 40% of the St. Paul school kids are failing in their school because of the online education. So we need both. At the same time, the income, especially renters, are being hard hit because the income has gone down and cost burden households are increased. So that's why in our proposal to the legislature to a dual strategy.
Yeah, it's absolutely a both and. They're so intrinsically interconnected, and we need to think of them as that. And I think we also need to think about our future as a city and as a region. And again, I'll go back to the cities and regions that figure this out, how to do the education and how to address the near-term issues at the speed of a global pandemic are going to be the cities and regions that benefit and realize a brighter tomorrow. And I wholeheartedly believe that.
Okay, great. Thank you both. And then I think we'll have time for one last one here. We'll see that the FEI recently had a presentation on ESG bond financing. So environmental, social, and governance, sorry. Question is there a way that can be used and leveraged to help promote some of these kinds of things?
One of the things that we were looking at while we were approaching the Fed is what kind of instrument can we have? And I was pleasantly surprised to see that institutions like Barclays, Calvert have these social impact investment funds like this. Mm-hmm. And so I think they are good. That's what we want. And some of you, our financial expertise, help us develop an instrument, a community investment note that we can sell on the market to get the capital that will fund these projects.
Okay. And Jonathan, anything to add, or you?
I'll just go ditto to what Dr. Corey said.
Perfect. Well, those were all the questions that I had come in. I don't know, Nancy, if you had anything else come in.
I didn't see anything else, and I'll throw up the last poll while I search through the Q&As. I don't see anything that you have not already answered.
Okay.
So folks, your last poll is on the screen. If you take a few seconds to finish that up. Okay, I'm going to end that poll and share those results and make sure Dr. Corey and Jonathan know that you were paying attention.
Oh, we got to give them an A, like a good professor. I'll give you an
Absolutely.
A.
Thank you. Excellent. All right.
Great. Yeah, so Jonathan, Dr. Corey, I want to thank both of you for taking the time out of your day. I know you're both very busy and focused on some very important work. So this was greatly appreciated. Very interesting. We will share your information out with folks that have indicated they're willing to receive that. And I can tell you that we'll probably have more conversations about this going forward and try to see if there isn't a way that we as an organization can partner with the two of you to try and help move things forward as well. So thank you both. It was excellent. Greatly appreciated. Hope you have a great weekend and a safe and wonderful Thanksgiving.
Thank you, folks. We do wish you the best of the day. Your CPE credits, again, will be available in 7 to 10 business days. Thank you, Dr. Corey. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Brent. Again, the webinar is coming to its conclusion, and we do wish you the best of the holiday coming forward. Thank you, and have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.